Michael, tell me first of all then, how did an academic historian become interested in cricket? Where did that start for you?
Right, well, funnily enough, just here on TMS. So it was 1984. I'm showing my age here. I was 7 years old. That was the Blackwash series that many listeners will remember. Yeah, 5-0. West Indies steamrolled England that year. I think one Jonathan Agnew made his debut in the last test there and took a big wicket for Viv Richards. But that was it was a summer that was very memorable for me. I remember the sounds of listening to cricket on the radio. We didn't have a TV, so it was all about the sounds, and you could hear the crowd and the I always remember bells ringing in the background, and the commentators were very concerned that people might run on the pitch, and which they did frequently. So it was a memorable summer, and also a summer when I first started going down to my local village cricket club. And hanging out there, fetching the ball from the hedge and that kind of thing, like you do when you're 7. And the TMS was always on at those games too. But then later on, as a grown-up, as it were, I with my wife, I moved down to Brixton after university. And it was in Brixton that I got to meet, a lot of the very old generation of Caribbean migrants, the Windrush generation. And I realized just how fundamental cricket was, to their lives and their sense of who they were. So in 2007, I went out to Antigua with what became family friends, Auntie Gwen and Uncle Keith, who lived in Brixton, just down the road from me. And I stayed with them in Antigua and got to learn a lot more about it. So the seed of the Windrush Cricket project, if you will, was born really in 84. And 2007. So it's taken me some time to write the book.
A little while. Well, we're glad that idea came to you. We're very pleased that TMS played a part in piquing your interest in cricket to begin with.
Big part.
So take us back, though, to understanding, first of all, in order to understand the role that cricket then shaped in helping those migrants to settle in Britain when they did come, we need to understand really the role that cricket played in the Caribbean, particularly as under the wing of the British Empire. So take us back to that time and the significance of the game.
Yeah, it's a very long and complicated history, but I can kind of summarise it. I mean, the dark reality is that cricket in the Caribbean was kind of propagated, as it were, by soldiers, sailors, and slavers. The origins of cricket in the Caribbean are in slave societies. There's no way of dressing that up. And there's a famous artifact that some listeners might be familiar with called the Barbados cricket buckle, which was found in a riverbed, I think, in the River Tweed in the 70s. How it got there, I don't quite know. But it depicts a scene which is probably from the late 18th century of a slave in bondage, unmistakably in bondage, but standing in front of 3 stumps. And if I'm right, I think the third middle stump was introduced only after 1777, so that helps us sort of date the artifact, as it were. But he's holding a bat, and he's clean bowled for sure. But there's a sense there that cricket in the Caribbean is born out of very, very desperately unequal social relations. I mean, that's an understatement. But as time goes by, it kind of that sort of hope and anticipation that's born from black people in the Caribbean picking up the game, it becomes a mode of sort of social mobility, a way that people can make a career for themselves, make a name for themselves. And I think it's fair to say that cricket was embraced in the Caribbean more fully and more passionately than literally anywhere else in the British Empire. So by the time you reach, the interwar periods, you've got these incredible, iconic cricketers. Probably the most famous of them would have been Leary Constantine, later Sir Leary Constantine, who by the 30s was the highest paid sportsman in England, remarkably, playing cricket for Nelson in the Lancashire Leagues. So there's this sort of rich history where cricket is something that people in the Caribbean embrace and then utilize, if you will, to kind of, how to put it, to sort of enact an anti-colonial struggle. And that really comes to full fruition in the 60s and the 70s. As the great historian Sir Hilary Beckles put it, he said when Viv Richards was coming out to bat, in the late 70s or the early 80s, it wasn't just a game. It was, and I'm quoting him, the business of history and politics. So there's so much there about the Caribbean, but what I wanted to try and put my finger on was really the actual Windrush migration experience and what cricket meant for people who settled. People like Roland, actually, people who came over. And Roland came over in 67, I think, as a 13-year-old. And that was a very different thing. I mean, he's told his story beautifully in his recent autobiography, Breaking Barriers. But it wasn't a straightforward experience for those people. They were, especially the first settlers who set up the clubs, they were looking backwards towards a rich cricket heritage, but they were confronting new challenges, where they were making lives for the long term in England, becoming British citizens, and then having kids who were born in England and who, like, for example, David Sid Lawrence, would grow up and aspire to play for England and indeed do that. So that's quite a complicated story. But cricket was absolutely the cornerstone. This is one of the sort of big arguments that I tried to make in the book. Cricket was the cornerstone of settlement, alongside the church, actually. The cricket club and the church was where everything happened for those Windrush migrants. And sometimes people, even people coming off the Windrush boat itself in June 48, literally some of the first things they did was set up a cricket club. You've got the Leeds Caribbean Club, which people might have heard of in 48, but many others, the West Indians in Nottingham, Merseyside West Indians, 51, Manchester Moss Side, 53. So these are the really, like, the hubs of social and economic life. If you wanted to know about where to rent a house or who would help you with a legal dispute, you go to the cricket club. So everything is running through the club, but actually that story's been somewhat kind of neglected, as it were, by historians of post-war Britain. So that's the thing that I've been trying to kind of bring out in the book.
Well, let's bring in Roland, because Roland Butcher, you've been nodding along to a lot of what you've been hearing there from Michael. So put us into your situation. Your parents actually came over to Britain before you, didn't they? They were part of the Windrush generation in the 1950s before, as Michael said, you and your sister moved over when you were just 13 years of age. So what was that like for you?
Well, I think Michael is absolutely right. The relevance of cricket, certainly to West Indians, is something that, particularly in a place like England, that's what really kept them going. Since the Windrush, obviously, those people came, first of all, in 48, to a new country, new culture, uncertain future. They don't know what they're going to see here. And they brought cricket. I mean, my father came in 1955, so it wasn't that long after the first Windrush thing. So he was also faced with the same thing, and he was on his own, because basically, at that time, most parents didn't travel with their families because you don't know where you're going, so you have to go and start something. But what cricket meant to them was that, they brought the game of cricket with them, and that's how they could identify. When the West Indies were playing in England, they felt closer to home. And obviously it was very difficult years when they first arrived, but as Michael said, the cricket club and the development of the cricket club was something that was important because it made them feel homely. Cricket was part of that. But that has gone on, as Michael said, till the point where people who were, those persons who then had kids, and the kids were born here, then aspiring to play for England in the case of Sid Lawrence, etc. But cricket has always been, the number one thing. And the important thing was about cricket was that it wasn't just males that were interested. I mean, the females were, were really into the game. Certainly in my youth,
Knowledgeable about it.
and very knowledgeable about it. And particularly myself. I mean, I grew up in a house of all women, and obviously they love cricket, listen to it all the time, and that was brought to England. So the setting up of the cricket clubs really was the setting up of another part of the West Indies in England.
And remind us, Roland, of your, you obviously came over, you already had played cricket in Barbados, but your route then into it once you got to England, which ultimately led you to Middlesex and the England team.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously arrived unexpectedly. When I say unexpectedly, my father had on several occasions tried to get my grandmother to send us to England. Obviously, by that time, when she relented in 1967, because before that she said, she would always say to him, "No, it's too cold, they're not coming." But in 67, she felt, I was getting older, I needed a man's figure around me. So she agreed for us to come. Now, yeah, we arrived in England, and obviously it was something completely different to what we've been accustomed to. But eventually, we got into the system. But what affected me initially was that I arrived in England, and everywhere I went, kids were playing football. When in Barbados, it was the complete opposite. They were playing cricket. So that took me back for a while. And obviously, I then got into the football. Hadn't played before, and then really fell in love with that sport, and that's all I was doing. And it was through football that I actually got back into cricket. So that's how I got back into cricket. I mean, the weekends, me and my friends would go to the local park, and we would play football to our heart's content. And this particular Sunday, we were playing, and we usually about 3 hours we would spend, and we were just about to pack up, and some guys came onto the field and put some stumps up, wandered over to our group and said, "Listen, guys, we're a few players short. Would any of you guys like to play?" And we said no. I mean, we were cold, hungry. And the normal thing on Sundays, you go home, have a shower, eat, and watch more football. And one of my friends, who obviously I had spoken to about playing cricket in the Caribbean, he said, "You like cricket, why don't you play?" But he eventually persuaded me, and I did play. Didn't do much, but obviously enough for them to ask me to play the next week. It was a third 11 team. And basically I thought, well, they're going to be short next week, so that's why they want me to play. But that's why I got back into the game, and then obviously the development from there through to Middlesex and England. But it was through football, really, that I got back into cricket.
We're very glad that you did.
Yeah.
Michael, what was the strength of that West Indies Test team through the 1980s, at a time where it was difficult for a lot of Caribbean migrants in the UK settling? Racism was rife. Yep. The sense of pride when there was a successful West Indies team playing in England against England, what impact did that have on the Caribbean community?
I think it had a huge impact, Alison. But I do think it's sometimes a bit more complicated than we realise. So I'll explain what I mean. Obviously, the astonishing achievements of Clive Lloyd and Viv Richards as captains, that West Indies generation was a source of immense pride for a lot of Black British people and people who'd recently migrated from the Caribbean as well. Everybody I spoke to, did a lot of interviews for the book. Everybody said the same thing, and people have really fond memories of supporting, of taking their culture, their ethnicity to the cricket ground and bringing the music and the vibrancy and feeling for a moment at peace and able to celebrate who they are in what was, let's be honest, by the late 70s, early 80s, an overtly hostile society. There is a huge amount of overt racism in Britain during that period. But it wasn't as straightforward as that, because when the match is over and people go home, they're kids in secondary schools in South London or in Tottenham or in Birmingham or in Leeds or wherever they might be. And at that point in time, the West Indies cricket team is not there, and they've got to kind of make their way through the system. And that's why I think what Roland's just said about football is so important in a way for how we think about the game in the present as well. So Ebony tells the same story, Ebony Rainford Brent of your parish, and chair of the ACE programme, which I think listeners will be familiar with. It wasn't straightforward to love cricket. If you were a black British person born in England, it wasn't straightforward. Yes, you were proud of previous generations, and certainly your parents would be very aware of what's going on. But often kids would want to play football because football was the national sport in England. When Windrush migrants arrived, in 48, they arrived into a cricket-mad country. In 53 was probably the high point of passion for cricket, maybe, the Ashes victory of 53. But by the late 70s and the early 80s, cricket was beginning to decline, and particularly in state schools, it wasn't being played so much. So there was always that tension, and there was that sense that you had to make people realise why cricket is a beautiful and fun game to play, without necessarily relying on the cricket heritage, if you see what I mean. So it's a double-edged issue that we're dealing with here, and that sort of leads into the ISEC report, the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket, and how
you were a commissioner for that, weren't you, Michael?
I was one of the 4 commissioners, under the chair, Cindy Butts. So we did a lot of work on black cricket in England, both historically, but particularly in terms of the contemporary situation. And the ECB has responded in interesting ways to that report. But one of the iconic institutions, really, for the black cricket community in England was the Haringey Cricket College, which I know that Roland is familiar with, and I think you probably are too, Alison. The college was founded in 84 by Bernie Grant MP, actually, a Labour MP for Tottenham. It's David Lammy's constituency. He's obviously the Foreign Secretary now. And it was a really massive project which produced a long list of fine first-class cricketers. Mark Allane's probably one of the most famous, but Keith Piper, there were many. It was, you could sort of frame it as one of the most successful pathways for professional cricket of its time. It produced more first-class cricketers than many famous public schools we could mention. But that college was closed eventually, despite the best efforts of many people involved, in the winter of 1996 and into the spring of 97. And that was a really crushing moment, I think, which a lot of the older generation of black British people who were involved in cricket remember very, very vividly.
What's the reason for the closure? Just economics, finances?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, there were a lot of rumours that circulated at the time, and I kind of got very interested in this and was very, very fortunate to, again, just through local village cricket networks, to come across a man called Tom Rodwell. If you're listening, Tom, hello. Tom was one of the last trustees of the college and was sitting on a kind of cache of documents from that period where he'd written to literally everybody that cared about cricket to try and save the Haringey College. The rumours at the time were that Reg Scarlett was leaving to become the head coach of the Jamaica talent pathway, which was true. And so Reg Scarlett, who was a West Indies spinner and very charismatic, strong personality that really led that generation of Haringey cricketers, he was departing. There was an argument that the Labour government incoming wasn't particularly interested in cricket as a competitive sport. And then there was another red herring, I'm afraid, which was that the college was going to get money from the national lottery, but that wasn't forthcoming. What actually happened is that the Littlewoods pools, back in the day, the 80s and the 90s, people used to do the Littlewoods pools, and the money from the pools went to charities, and one of them was Haringey Cricket College. Littlewoods pools folded, And there was a 6 to 9 month hiatus where the Haringey College's money was basically cut. And what had happened at that point was that Tom Rodwell and others had begged, I think is the word, the ECB, which was just coming into existence during that winter, to fund the college during that period of time. And I'm sorry to say that the sad truth is that the ECB was absolutely not interested in doing that. And if you look back to that period, 97, look at the document called Raising the Standard, which is the first contribution the ECB made to assessing the field, as it were, the scope of cricket in England. There is absolutely no sense that cricket is being played by any ethnic minority group in England, and certainly not Caribbean players, which is astonishing because, we will all remember people like Devon Malcolm, who, the indomitable Devon Malcolm, who's now the Black Cricket Liaison Officer for the ECB. But in the mid-90s, Philip de Freitas, Devon Malcolm, Gladstone Small, these were heroic England players that we all sort of looked up to. But this is now past. They were not always treated with the respect that they deserved. So it was impossible for the ECB not to know the extent of what was going on. But it was, I'm afraid, profoundly indifferent to the plight of the Haringey College. So,
but the college is happily set to reopen.
Well, I'm really glad you said that, because there is a really happy ending possibly to this, which is that various actors, including the Selby Trust in Tottenham, I think David Lammy MP, and the ECB are looking to reopen the Haringey Cricket College in a new form, but at least to get cricket back into the heart of Tottenham.
Indeed.
And that would be a new context, Alison.
Yeah.
But it would be a great story to the kind of Caribbean heritage of England.
The umpires are on their way out, Michael, and by way of wrapping up, given that you were part of that ICEC report, and it's a big part of making cricket accessible to all, are you seeing an impact in the updates we've had from ECB so far? Obviously, the Haringey College, one part of that.
Yeah, that's one part of it. I am. I mean, I think we're still cautiously optimistic. One of the really important elements to the ISEC report was around the issue of class and private schooling. And I think, money is being pumped into different organisations like the ACE programme, like SACA, the South Asian Cricket Academy, to try and change the way that the sort of talent pathway looks. But that's the key thing. Many of us love cricket. We know it's a fun game. But in order to change the face of English cricket, we have to really reform that talent pathway structure. And I think the ECB is onto that. A lot of good things have happened in terms of women's cricket as well, but there's a long way to go, Alison.
Yeah. Michael, thank you very much for being with us. And your book, Windrush Cricket, Imperial Culture, Caribbean Migration, the Remaking of Postwar England, a fascinating read. It's Dr. Michael Collins joining us from where he's in New Delhi at the moment. Roland, I do remember a quote from Ebony when she was starting up the ACE programme, just saying, finding that it wasn't that the Caribbean communities didn't want cricket, it was that cricket wasn't doing enough to reach out to them. And happily, that is changing and is much more cognizant around making that effort.
Yes, most definitely. And thanks to Michael, he's been doing a lot of work behind the scenes even before he's written this book, certainly to get the Haringey situation up and running. And I'm very pleased that they're close to getting it done.
Roland, thank you for being with us. I think Stephen Finn is going to come in for the start of this England run chase. Henry Moran is sliding in place as well. But yeah, a fascinating chat with Dr. Michael Collins and everything he has been looking into about Windrush cricket and the impact that cricket has made and the importance of it to the Caribbean communities in the UK. And let's hope that many more cricketers will join this England team, Henry, in the future as well. But 309 is the England target to win the match, and therefore that would also be the series. Over to you.
Thank you.